What happens when the BBC marries its war propaganda regarding Afghanistan with its ongoing anti-China propaganda regarding the Western Chinese region of Xinjiang? There is born articles like this: Afghanistan's Uyghurs fear the Taliban, and now China too. And if you go through this article, basically what they're saying is there's all of these Uyghurs who are living peacefully in Afghanistan under US-occupied Afghanistan, actually. And now they're all worried because the Taliban took over, and they're worried that China is just going to extend their supposed genocide of the Uyghurs in Xinjiang over Afghan territory as well. That's what this whole article is about. They never mention why China might be interested in certain Uyghurs living in Afghanistan. They never talk about the real terrorism and extremism that had plagued Xinjiang and prompted the Chinese government to put in security measures that they're now calling human rights abuses. The BBC starts out with a healthy, repetitious mentioning of all of these lies that the BBC and others have been pushing. So they say since 2017, the Uyghurs and other Muslim minorities have been subjected to a state campaign of mass detention, surveillance, forced labor, and according to some accounts, sterilization, torture, and rape. China routinely denies all human rights abuses in Xinjiang and says its camps are vocational centers designed to combat extremism. And as a matter of fact, the BBC itself confirms China's version of this story, believe it or not, about combating extremism, because an old BBC article from 2014 that I'm going to go over in just a minute, it has a very long list of the sort of extremism China faced and why they might think they need vocational centers to kind of deprogram these extremists and help get them back into society in a very constructive way. So many of Afghanistan's Uyghurs, thought to number about 2,000, are second-generation immigrants whose parents fled China many decades ago, long before the current crackdown began. But their Afghan ID cards still say Uyghur or Chinese refugee, and they fear that if China enters the vacuum left by the US, they could be targeted. Uyghurs in Xinjiang are not targeted unless they're involved or in some way support extremism. So what are these Uyghurs in Afghanistan worried about? Why did they feel so comfortable under US-occupied Afghanistan, and now why are they so worried about China and its influence over Afghanistan? And when we talk about influence, we talk about China actually reconstructing Afghanistan versus the US staying there for 20 years, saying they're reconstructing Afghanistan, and then when they leave, everything that they built collapsed overnight. Just two possibilities, and the BBC never really gets into which is which. They could be worried because they're part of this separatist extremist movement that wants to carve Xinjiang off of Chinese territory and turn it into East Turkestan. This is what the violent separatists call Xinjiang, East Turkestan. Or it could be because they read the BBC and they actually believe all of these things that the BBC and others say about China. So there's two possibilities there. So the article talks about how China reaches into all of these other countries far beyond China's borders to snatch up Uyghurs. It says here, the fear of China is not unfounded. The Chinese state has in recent years extended its crackdown on the Uyghurs beyond its borders, using aggressive tactics to silence people or in some cases detain and render them back to Xinjiang. Again, they don't say why China is interested in doing this. Are they trying to round up every Uyghur on earth? Or are they trying to target Uyghurs involved in the violent separatism that is taking place inside of China's borders? Data published in June by the Uyghur Human Rights Project suggests at least 395 Uyghurs have been deported, extradited, or rendered since 1997, though the real figure may be much higher, or the figure might have been completely fabricated, because who is the Uyghur Human Rights Project? It's right here. Funded by the US government through the National Endowment for Democracy. It's right here. It's the first one listed here. Go to their website, scroll all the way down to the bottom. It's literally based in Washington, D.C. And what is the Uyghur Human Rights Project? It promotes the rights of the Uyghurs and other Turkic Muslim peoples in East Turkestan. Where is East Turkestan? Because I can't find it anywhere on a map. Where is East Turkestan? Oh, referred to by the Chinese government and everyone else on earth as the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. So this term, East Turkestan, is only used by separatists, by these extremists who want to carve Xinjiang out of Chinese territory and establish an independent state, which would effectively be a client regime because of the United States, because as you can see, all of these separatist groups are openly funded by the US government. It's not even a secret. Uyghur human rights, down here, World Uyghur Congress says a very similar thing on their website about Chinese-occupied East Turkestan. No one in the world recognizes East Turkestan except apparently the US government's National Endowment for Democracy, who funds these separatist groups. If you go to the UN's actual website, you will only find things like this. This is the United Nations Security Council, Eastern Turkestan Islamic Movement. It's posted here because it's a terrorist group. The Eastern Turkestan Islamic Movement is an organization which has used violence to further its aim of setting up an independent, so-called East Turkestan within China. East Turkestan, in quotation marks, East Turkestan within China. So this is the UN recognizing East Turkestan as Xinjiang, China. And these are terrorists trying to transform Xinjiang into East Turkestan. So that's where the actual international community stands on Xinjiang and this phrase, East Turkestan. So let's get back to the BBC article. So this is who they're sourcing, and this should surprise nobody. The BBC is the same British state media organization that lied the public into the 2003 US-led invasion of Iraq. This was based on a deliberate lie regarding so-called weapons of mass destruction. 1 million dead, including thousands of Western troops, including British troops, by the way. And more recently, in their propaganda campaign against China, they have been caught literally portraying China in the worst light possible. And by that I mean they have opened up Photoshop and doctored images to make everything in China look more dreary. They even took green trees and photoshopped them to look gray. This is the level of deceit and propaganda at work at the BBC. So keep that in mind. And if we go through here, they just keep talking about the Belt and Road, how China's going to use the Belt and Road to kind of dangle over the Taliban's head to get them to just hand over these Uyghurs, because China's just so determined to torment every Uyghur on earth for no reason, apparently. China's Belt and Road project has given it a lot of economic leverage over countries with which it cooperates, and in exchange, Uyghurs are often scapegoated, said Bradley Jardine, an analyst who has studied China's economic and political presence abroad. I wonder who he is an analyst for. Oh, he's an analyst for the Wilson Center. How is the Wilson Center funded? This is from wilsoncenter.org. As an official memorial to President Wilson, Congress supports the Wilson Center through an annual appropriation. However, 70% of the annual operating budget must be raised from private sources to ensure the center's continued role in the dialogue of democracy. And when they say private sources, they mean arms manufacturers, oil companies, banks, all of these entrenched monopolies that fear their wealth and influence is being threatened by a rising China and, in more general terms, a rising Asia, a rising Eurasia. So that's another source, the BBC. I think you could see the theme of all of these sources the BBC is citing is the US government just funds them. This is all US government propaganda. This is how they're spinning this new narrative about China, Afghanistan, and now these poor Uyghurs that China's going to just kidnap and send to torture dungeons in Xinjiang for no reason, apparently. Now, why is China interested in Uyghurs in Afghanistan or anywhere else beyond their borders? Because there was a real terrorist problem. It is being sponsored by the US, as you see clearly. And so when these groups are based somewhere beyond China's borders and they're antagonizing the security crisis inside of China's borders, that is their business, and they need to sort that out. And I want to show you how the BBC itself reported on how dire the security situation was in Xinjiang before the so-called crackdown began. So this is an article from 2014. Why is there tension between China and the Uyghurs? Here we go. We're going to read through this. It's kind of long, but it's important to see how how the BBC's own narrative over Xinjiang has changed and what they are now willfully omitting when they talk about Xinjiang and why China has implemented the security measures that are now in place. This is why. The BBC itself explains it. China has been accused of intensifying its crackdown on the Uyghurs after street protests in the 1990s and again in the run-up to the Beijing Olympics in 2008. But things really escalated in 2009 with large-scale ethnic rioting in the regional capital Urumqi. Some 200 people were killed in the unrest, most of them Han Chinese, according to officials. Security was increased and many Uyghurs detained as suspects, but violence rumbled on as right groups increasingly pointed to tight control by Beijing. But if there was violence, why wouldn't Beijing be putting in tighter controls? In June 2012, 6 Uyghurs reportedly tried to hijack a plane from Hotan to Urumqi before they were overpowered by passengers and crew. There was bloodshed in April 2013, and in June of that year, 27 people died in Shanxi County after police opened fire on what state media described as a mob armed with knives attacking local government buildings. Establishing facts about these incidents is difficult because foreign journalists' access to the region is tightly controlled, but in recent months, there appears to have been a shift toward larger-scale incidents where citizens have become the target, particularly in Xinjiang. At least 31 people were killed and more than 90 suffered injuries in May 2014 when 2 cars crashed through an Urumqi market and explosives were tossed into the crowd. China called it a violent terrorist incident. Look at this, the quotation marks, violent terrorist incident. What was it if it wasn't a violent terrorist incident? They crashed 2 cars into a crowded market and they were throwing explosives out the window. 31 people died. If that's not terrorism, what is? So you got to just keep in mind what you're dealing with. You're dealing with the BBC. It followed a bomb and knife attack on Urumqi's South Railway Station in April, which killed 3 and injured 79 others. In July, authorities said a knife-wielding gang attacked the police station and government offices in Yarkand, leaving 96 dead. The imam of China's largest mosque, Jume Tahir, was stabbed to death days later. In September, about 50 died in blasts in Lutai County outside police stations. A market and a shop. Details of both incidents are unclear, and activists have contested some accounts of incidents in state media. Again, remember, these are activists based in Washington, D.C. and funded by the U.S. government. So they can question the incidents, and then we can question them questioning the incidents. Some violence has also spilled out of Xinjiang. A March stabbing spree in Kunming in Yunnan province that killed 29 people was blamed on Xinjiang separatists, as was an October 2013 incident where a car plowed into a crowd and burst into flames in Beijing's Tiananmen Square. In response to the latest slew of attacks, the authorities have launched what they call a year-long campaign against terrorism, stepping up security in Xinjiang and conducting more military drills in the region, which is the logical thing to do. You just read by the BBC's own account the level of extremism, terrorism, and violence that was spreading not only throughout Xinjiang, but across the rest of China. As a matter of fact, because this was 2014, the next year, 2015, Uyghur extremists would attack Bangkok, Thailand. There was an explosion at a popular shrine. 20 people were murdered. And why? Because Thailand extradited Uyghur terror suspects back to China. The United States told Thailand, send them onward to Turkey, because the idea was getting all of these Uyghur extremists into Turkey so they could cross over into Syria, join ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and fight the Syrian government on Washington's behalf. Thailand ignored Washington, sent them back to China, so a couple of months later there was this bombing in downtown Bangkok. So this is a huge problem, not just for China, not just for Xinjiang, not just for China, but the entire region. And then when you really think about it, all of these Uyghur extremists, by the thousands, were going to Syria to join terrorist organizations and fight on the battlefield. This is a global problem. This was global terrorism emanating out of Xinjiang. We see how the U.S. government, through the National Endowment for Democracy, is openly funding separatist organizations, advocating separatism. So it's very clear what's going on here. The U.S. is behind the Uyghur extremists and separatists. And then they're also behind these fake human rights organizations pretending to be outraged by very necessary security measures for very obvious violence and terrorism. And now the BBC, coming all the way back to this original article, now they're trying to mutate this narrative to make it look like China is done abusing the Uyghurs in Xinjiang alone. Now they're going to expand their campaign of genocide and fear. They're going to expand it into Afghanistan. And this is their way of getting ahead of the curve. Like I said, China wants to develop Afghanistan. The US is open about its desire to stop the Belt and Road Initiative everywhere. And of course, they're not going to make an exception for Afghanistan. If you thought this video was useful, please like and share it. Think about subscribing. It's free to do and it helps the channel grow. I have a website, newaatlas.report. All of my articles and videos are there. There is no paywall. There never will be a paywall. If I'm ever kicked off of YouTube, I will still be able to host videos elsewhere and embed them on the website, so you can find all of my work there. Check the video description for all the links that I referenced. Get to know these sources. When you see a source, a BBC article, get in the habit of looking up who they are and who funds them. And then a lot of things become much clearer. There's also ways in the video description where you can help support my work. To people who have been supporting my work, whether you've been doing it through Patreon, supporting me month to month, or through a one-time donation, or even if you're just helping like and share my videos or my articles, thank you so much. Without that help, none of this is possible. And as always, thank you for watching.